You know what's wild? Right now, as you're watching this, there's a country where a Muslim woman in a hijab, a Buddhist monk in saffron robes, a Hindu priest with a tilak on his forehead, and a Chinese businessman all sit at the same table eating lunch together. And nobody thinks it's weird. Nobody's posting about it on social media like it's some revolutionary moment. It's just Tuesday. While Europe spent centuries perfecting the art of religious wars, while the Americas built themselves on waves of forced segregation, while most of Asia picked sides and stuck with them, Malaysia looked at the entire concept of pick one and said something that would change everything. But here's the part that makes no sense. This isn't some tiny island nation with 100 people where everyone knows each other's names. This is 33 million people. And somehow, it works. But the real question nobody's asking is, how did we all miss this? How did a country pull off what every political science textbook says is impossible, and why isn't everyone studying what they did? Because here's what they don't tell you in school. When the Portuguese showed up in 1511, they thought they'd found just another spice trading post. Easy pickings. They had no idea they'd stumbled onto something that would eventually become the greatest social experiment the modern world has ever seen. And the craziest part? Malaysia wasn't even trying to prove a point. They were just trying to survive. Let me paint you a picture of what this place actually looks like, because your geography teacher definitely skipped this part. Malaysia sits right there on the equator, split between a peninsula that hangs off the bottom of Thailand and a chunk of the island of Borneo that's bigger than England. That geographical split already makes zero sense for a unified country, but wait, it gets weirder. The peninsula is covered in jungle so thick that during World War II, entire armies disappeared into it. The cities somehow look like someone combined Singapore, Mumbai, and Shanghai, then threw in British colonial architecture for flavor. And the food. Oh man, the food is where things get really interesting, because you can't fake cultural integration in a kitchen. But let's rewind, because you need to understand what makes this so statistically impossible. 62% Muslim, 21% Buddhist, 6% Hindu, 9% Christian, and then a mix of traditional beliefs that predate all of them. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, so they divided up into separate neighborhoods, separate schools, separate lives, right? Wrong. And that's where your brain should be doing backflips right now, because that's not how humans usually work. We're really good at finding reasons to separate ourselves. It's kind of our thing. So what happened here? The British happened. But not in the way you think. See, when the British colonized Malaya in the 1700s, they did something that would accidentally set the stage for the most diverse nation in Asia. They needed workers for tin mines and rubber plantations, so they brought in massive waves of Chinese and Indian laborers. The local Malays were already there, obviously, practicing Islam and controlling most of the agricultural land. The British basically created a three-tier economy without thinking through what would happen when they eventually left. The Chinese controlled commerce and trade. The Indians ran the plantations and infrastructure. The Malays owned the land and held political power. It was a powder keg wrapped in a time bomb, and everyone knew it. 1969 happened. Race riots broke out that killed hundreds, maybe thousands. Nobody even knows the real number because the government sealed the records. The country nearly tore itself apart. And this is the moment where Malaysia should have become another tragic story of colonial aftermath, another country that couldn't overcome its divisions. Every expert predicted it would fail. The smart money was on the country splitting into ethnic enclaves or falling into permanent conflict. Instead, something unprecedented happened. Instead of doubling down on separation, instead of picking a dominant culture and forcing everyone else to assimilate, Malaysia's leaders sat down and created a constitution that reads like it was written by people from 100 years in the future. They made Islam the official religion, yes, but then they guaranteed freedom of practice for every other religion. They made Malay the national language but protected the right to speak Chinese, Tamil, and English. They created economic policies that would help the Malays catch up economically, but they didn't ban other groups from success. It was like they looked at every other country's playbook and decided to write their own. Now here's where it gets really interesting, and why you should be paying attention, because this affects you even if you've never been within 5,000 miles of Southeast Asia. Malaysia became a test case for something political scientists said was impossible: creating a modern, economically successful nation without a dominant monoculture. The conventional wisdom, the stuff they teach in every international relations course, is that diverse countries are inherently unstable. That you need one language, one religion, one dominant ethnic group to hold everything together. Malaysia looked at that theory and accidentally proved it wrong. Walk through any Malaysian city, and you'll see something that breaks your brain if you're from most other places. It's Friday afternoon, so the mosques are packed for prayers. But right across the street, a Chinese temple has incense burning and people are praying to their ancestors. Next door, there's a Hindu temple with a festival happening, colors everywhere, music blasting. And 2 blocks down, a Christian church is having a wedding. All of this happening simultaneously, in the same neighborhood, and everyone just goes about their day. No protests. No tension. No social media outrage. It's so normal it's revolutionary. But you're probably thinking, okay, sure, they coexist, but do they actually integrate? Do they actually mix, or is it just tolerance from a distance? And that's the billion-dollar question, because tolerance is easy. Actual integration, actual friendship and mixing across groups, that's the hard part. So here's what they're not telling you. Malaysian schools teach multiple languages. Not as a foreign language elective, but as required courses. Kids grow up actually fluent in multiple languages because they need to navigate their own country. Your average Malaysian college student can switch between Malay, English, and Mandarin in the same sentence, sometimes the same breath. They call it code switching, and it's so fluid that linguists study it like it's a new form of communication. The food scene is where you see the real integration, and I know that sounds superficial, but stay with me because food is culture in its purest form. Malaysians created entirely new cuisines by mixing their different culinary traditions. There's a whole category called Nyonya food that's a fusion of Chinese and Malay cooking that neither China nor Malaysia could have created alone. The national obsession with mamak stalls, these Indian Muslim restaurants that serve roti canai and teh tarik, transcends every ethnic boundary. You'll see everyone there. The Chinese businessman, the Malay college student, the Indian grandmother, all eating the same food, at the same place, often at the same table. Try finding that combination anywhere else. Marriages across ethnic lines are becoming more common, which should tell you something, because people don't marry outside the group if there's real animosity. The language is evolving into something linguists have never seen before, this hybrid called Manglish that pulls words and grammar from Malay, English, Chinese, and Tamil. It's technically incorrect by every formal linguistic standard, but it's also beautiful because it only works if you understand all the source cultures. It's a language that could only exist in Malaysia. Now let's talk about what happened economically, because this is where Malaysia really messed up everyone's predictions. After independence, Malaysia was poor. Like most of Southeast Asia, it was rural, agricultural, and way behind the developed world. The standard playbook for developing countries was to pick a development model, follow the Western capitalist path, or try something else. Malaysia did both. They created a hybrid economy that mixed free market capitalism with strategic government intervention, and they specifically designed policies to prevent any one ethnic group from dominating economically while still allowing for competition and growth. The results? Malaysia went from a per capita GDP of $300 in 1960 to over $11,000 today. They became one of the world's largest producers of semiconductors, palm oil, and rubber. Kuala Lumpur built the Petronas Towers, which were the tallest buildings in the world when they opened. Not the tallest in Asia. Not the tallest in the developing world. The tallest buildings on the planet. That was Malaysia making a statement. But here's the part that doesn't make sense according to traditional economics. They did all of this while maintaining policies that redistributed wealth along ethnic lines to prevent inequality from causing instability. Every economist said you can't have both growth and redistribution. Malaysia said watch this. But it's not perfect, and this is important because I'm not trying to sell you some utopian fantasy. Malaysia still has problems. The Bumiputra policies, which give advantages to ethnic Malays, create resentment among Chinese and Indian Malaysians who feel like they're second-class citizens despite being born there. Political Islam is becoming more conservative, which worries secular Muslims and non-Muslims alike. Corruption is a persistent problem. Press freedom is limited. There are real issues. But here's what's fascinating. Despite these problems, despite the tensions that definitely exist, Malaysia hasn't collapsed. It hasn't had another race riot since 1969. It hasn't split apart. It hasn't fallen into authoritarian dictatorship despite having all the risk factors. It's remained relatively stable and relatively democratic for over 60 years, which in the developing world is basically a miracle. Countries with way less diversity have fallen apart in that time. So what's keeping Malaysia together? The answer seems to be something that sounds too simple to be true, but hear me out. Malaysians have bought into a national identity that's bigger than their ethnic or religious identities. Not instead of those identities, but in addition to them. They've created a society where you can be fully Chinese and fully Malaysian, fully Indian and fully Malaysian, fully Malay and fully Muslim and fully Malaysian. The identities stack instead of competing. And before you say that's obvious, ask yourself why almost no other diverse country has managed to do this successfully. Think about the alternative scenarios we see everywhere else. In Europe, integration often means assimilation. You come to France, you become French, which means you give up visible markers of your origin culture. In the United States, the melting pot ideal meant everyone was supposed to blend into an American identity that was basically Anglo-Protestant with minor variations. In China, ethnic minorities are expected to adopt Han Chinese culture. In India, religious nationalism is rising. In the Middle East, in Africa, in most of the world, diversity is treated as a problem to be solved, not a feature to be celebrated. Malaysia treats diversity like a competitive advantage. They market themselves to the world as a place where East meets West, where you can do business in multiple languages, where you understand multiple cultural perspectives. Their tourism slogan is literally, Malaysia, truly Asia, because they're the only place where you get all of Asia in one country. That's not just clever marketing. That's a fundamentally different way of thinking about what a nation can be. And this is why you should care about Malaysia even if you never plan to go there. Because the world is getting more diverse, not less. Migration, globalization, and interconnection mean that most countries are becoming more multicultural whether they want to or not. And most countries are handling it terribly. We're seeing the rise of ethno-nationalism, religious extremism, anti-immigrant parties, border walls, and increasing polarization almost everywhere. The conventional wisdom is that this is inevitable, that humans are just too tribal to live peacefully with people who are different. Malaysia suggests that's wrong. Malaysia suggests that with the right institutions, the right attitudes, and the right policies, diversity doesn't have to mean division. That people can maintain distinct identities while sharing a common national project. That economic growth and ethnic redistribution aren't mutually exclusive. That multiple religions can coexist without constant conflict. None of this is easy, and Malaysia certainly hasn't perfected it, but they've done something that most experts said was impossible. So why isn't Malaysia a bigger deal? Why isn't every political science student studying what they did? Why isn't every diverse country looking at the Malaysian model? Part of it is that Malaysia doesn't fit neat ideological categories. It's not fully Western or Eastern, not fully secular or religious, not fully capitalist or socialist. It makes everyone a little uncomfortable because it suggests that the either-or choices we're presented with might be false choices. It's easier to ignore Malaysia than to grapple with what their success implies about our own failures. But maybe that's changing. As the world struggles with rising diversity and rising conflict, maybe it's time to pay attention to the place that's been quietly solving this problem for decades. Malaysia isn't perfect. It's messy, complicated, and full of contradictions. But it's also proof that the impossible might just be possible. That humans are capable of more cooperation and less tribalism than we give ourselves credit for. That the future doesn't have to be a choice between cultural extinction through assimilation or permanent conflict between separate groups. Malaysia was the plot twist because while everyone else was busy either forcing conformity or accepting division as inevitable, they built something different. Something that shouldn't work according to all our theories but does anyway. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most important lesson available right now. The world needs more plot twists like Malaysia.